大家好哈，理事长，潘老师、黄老师，还有王老师哈，好，各位教授、各位先进哈，大家好哈。那本人林毅的哈，非常荣幸，非常高兴哈，让理事长有这个机会让我上台来引荐我们这个外国的第一位讲者哈，他叫 Ryan 哈。那因为他第一个讲者，我还准备了2个投影片哈，大概第一个。主持人花这么多时间要在上面讲比较多时间，因为他大概只有录30分钟哈，他特别跟我讲，差10分钟 ，Alex 你给我在上面好好的再撑个10分钟哈。那我简单介绍一下啊，那这 Ryan 哈，他本身是亚利桑那州立大学的博士，他主修运动科学跟运动营养方面，所以是蛮正相关的。那他还蛮多才多艺的哈。他 postdoc 在 UCLA 做的，他拿2个硕士哈。那第一个硕士是在那个南加大拿一个 MBA， 所以说他也蛮有商业头脑的哈。那第2个硕士是在那个圣地亚哥州立大学学运动心理方面，所以他本身有coaching 的经验，怎么样去指导运动员做得更好。好，那他除了说学养蛮丰富之外哈，他很特别的，他本身还能够竞赛。他本身也是全美女子赛艇队第1名的，他里面的一个重要的主力的成员他非常自豪的跟我讲这件事情，说我在华盛顿大学这个赛艇队待了4年，那因为我没有概念了，我特别要去查一下华盛顿州立大学是有多强是年年都是冠军的表示说他自己本身是有训练比赛的经验所以你可以看得出来他非常的 fit 非常的年轻漂亮，事实上以老外来讲，他其实也不是很年轻的他维持一个非常好的一个状态。好，那他之前2017年的时候，我们也非常荣幸有机会请他到这个台北市立大学运动科学学院然后去讲说他本身怎么样去教专业运动员因为他在洛杉矶的足球队，他也是他们的专属的运动营养方面的教练然后他把这方面的经验来分享。那非常高兴，今天我们能够请到他来讲 dehydration hyperthermia 有点不太熟这个单字跟 athlete 这方面的主题那非常正相关的，非常欢迎他。那我下一页就是。因为这次本次的演讲是美沙特宝福赞助那我特别把它秀出来谢谢大家。
Hi, I'm Dr. Dana Ryan, and it's a great honor to be with you with the Taiwan Society for Sports Nutrition. It is an honor, and I'm very excited. I wish I could be there in person, but today we have a very, very important topic to talk about. But before we get started, I wanted to quickly introduce myself. I know I had the pleasure of being there a few years ago, but for those of you that I do not know and have not met, I am the Director of Sports Performance, Nutrition, and Education at Herbalife International. My background, while at Herbalife, I work with all of our sponsored teams and athletes through all of our sports nutrition education. My background, you can see, is a bit varied, and I think that is something that you will see in the training and the research, and what we talk about is, rather than just 100% focusing on nutrition throughout my career, you'll see I have a background in psychology, sports psychology, as well as, of course, nutrition and exercise physiology. So,
我们让工作团呢来聚焦一下，让他们讲，然后去搞一下看看。会不会是档案很大？他在读的时候，是压缩的关系。好。他们说播放几个点一下，3个点。然后播放几次，把它调一下。
lot of time in the academic world, doing some teaching, doing some research, and now I have the honor, like you said, to be working for Herbalife Nutrition, working with all of our sponsored teams and athletes. So working with the general population, as well as also with our sponsored teams and athletes and our elite athletes. And so what we're going to be talking about today is hydration and dehydration, and something that is so incredibly important for every single athlete, every single level. And I think that, I know a lot of you are students and are thinking, maybe I want to work with elite athletes someday. Well, one of the things that we talk about is that sports nutrition is really for everyone. And when we talk about sports nutrition, I think that everyday athlete, that general gym goer, they might not always think, I need sports nutrition. But honestly, that's where you can make such a huge impact. In addition, of course, to working with elite athletes, working with professional athletes, but helping the general population understand why sports nutrition is so incredibly important for them. And I think one of the reasons that, there's two reasons I think people don't often see sports nutrition as being important for the everyday person is, first and foremost, the average person doesn't see themselves as an athlete. They think an athlete is only the people playing sports on TV, only the people going to the Olympics, and that's who they think an athlete is. But the reality is anyone that is out there pushing their bodies, stressing themselves on a daily basis, they are an athlete, and sports nutrition really is for them. And so when working with people that are getting started into an exercise program, or just that average athlete, really getting to feel like sports nutrition is something that is for them is very, very important. The second reason that a lot of people are afraid of sports nutrition is that they feel like it's too complicated. They don't understand what is the magic of sports nutrition. And the reality is that sports nutrition is really, it's about eating with a purpose, and it's the right nutrients at the right time. So you take the foundation of general nutrition, and then we add timing to it. When do we need carbohydrates? When do we need protein? How do healthy fats play into the day? And so getting people to understand that you understand the principles of general nutrition. Now let's figure out how to get those nutrients at the right time to help maximize your performance. And one of the biggest things, as I'm sure most of you know, is the importance of hydration. So we're going to talk about hydration and dehydration as well. We'll talk a little bit about how some of our pro teams approach hydration and making sure that they know that their athletes are hydrated. And then we'll spend a little bit of time at the end talking about special considerations in the cold and concerns about hyperthermia and how do you properly fuel yourself and hydrate yourself in cold weather, because there's a whole lot of circumstances that are just thrown on top of the need for hydration when we start talking about cold weather. And we know the Winter Olympics are coming up, winter sports are starting, especially here, in Taiwan and the United States. And we want to make sure that we're aware of those different physiological changes that happen within the body to make sure that we're able to stay hydrated no matter the climate that we're in. So let's start with just the basics, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is why. Why is hydration so critical? Why, as nutrition professionals, are we always talking about hydration? Well, if you look at this image, you can see the different body parts and how much water is involved. Water is up to 65% of our body. And so we want to make sure that when there's something that is such a big part of our body, that we pay special attention to it. So we know, just on a general level, hydration is important for the transportation of oxygen and nutrients. It's important for regulating our body temperature, which you can start to think when we start thinking about cold weather. Regulating our body temperature is very important. Hydration is essential for cardiovascular function. And now when we talk more specific about performance, cognitive function, and overall performance. These things, hydration plays a role in all of them. But it's not just as simple as saying, stay hydrated, right? Because hydration is influenced by our training status. So are you in shape? Are you not in shape? How intense is your training? What is the temperature outside? What is the humidity outside? What is the environment? What sort of equipment do you have to wear? I think oftentimes people underestimate the effect of adding equipment. So whether it's an American football player and they have a helmet, and they have pads, all of these things can influence our hydration status. So hydration is not something that you just think about when you go into practice, when you go into a training session. That's not when you want to start thinking about hydration. Hydration is something that we need to focus on throughout an entire day, right? So we always talk about whether you're a pro athlete or you're an everyday athlete. Being an athlete is a lifestyle and it's a mindset, and it's something that we need to think about all day long. So while we're going to focus on hydration around your workout, I want to make sure that we always are emphasizing to our athletes that hydration is something that we need to think about all throughout the entire day. Now, since we said that sports nutrition is all about right nutrients at the right time, we want to make sure that at each stage of our workout, so before our workout, our pre-workout, during our workout, and post-workout, we pay attention to our hydration. And how do we address our hydration and make sure that we're adequately hydrating our athletes at each stage of our workout? Now, like we said, you want to make sure that you emphasize to your athletes that hydration occurs throughout the entire day. So ideally, you want to make sure that your athletes are showing up to a training session hydrated. You don't want athletes showing up dehydrated. Now, obviously, that's the ideal case. But you want to make sure, especially if you're working with team sports or any athlete really, that you have a plan to assess hydration when they show up. So this is not something you necessarily have to do every day, but I wanted to give you two examples of, with some of our teams, how do we assess hydration when they show up for a training session. So on a daily basis, we will do weigh in and weigh out, and I'll talk more about that in the post-workout. But often we will have athletes show up, they'll weigh in before they head out to training session, and they'll weigh back in as soon as they finish the training session. Now, for some of our soccer teams, football teams, we also, at match day -2, so 2 days before match day, we're looking at their urine-specific gravity, and that's how we're addressing hydration status. So we do this 2 days before a game to make sure that we have adequate time to get an athlete hydrated and keep them hydrated before game day. So what we look at, you can see on this chart, this is how we assess hydration status. These are the cutoffs that we use with the urine-specific gravity to assess whether or not an athlete is hydrated, okay? Then from there, we want to make sure that we know how to address any changes that are needed. Okay, so if we're looking at a USG of 1.009 to 1.020, hydrated, we're good. We don't have to do anything, right? But you can see, the more dehydrated someone gets, the more water we're giving them, and we're also giving them an Herbalife 24 product that's called CR7 Drive. What this is a combination of carbohydrates and electrolytes to help address that dehydration. For the severe dehydrated athletes or any significantly dehydrated athlete, we also are adding in some salt as well to make sure that we are giving them enough sodium to help correct for that dehydration. So this is something that we are always going to do, 2 days before a game to make sure that our athletes are exactly where they need to be. Now, again, ideally if they're hydrating throughout the day, this is not an issue, but it's something that we make sure that we make athletes aware of. One of the other things that's very important with athletes as well is to get the education across to them so they can pay attention themselves in case you're not around. And so if you see the colors of this chart, you can also see this is similar to what we would ask an athlete to look for in terms of urine color. And so educating them as well to say, hey, you know, you always want to look for a light yellow color to know that you're hydrated. The darker the urine color, the more severely dehydrated you may be. That sort of education is very important for them as well, so that they can keep an eye on it. So match day -2, this is what we typically tend to do on a daily basis. We're also measuring, we're also weighing them before they go out to practice. So again, every step along the way, we're addressing hydration as needed. Now, during a workout, they came in, assessed the hydration, they weighed them, a USG, and then during workout, we want to make sure that our athletes understand what is actually happening when they're training. What are they sweating? What are they actually losing? Because I think oftentimes people don't really realize what exactly they're losing. They're thinking, okay, I'm just sweating, I'm just going to drink more water, I'm going to drink more water, and that's going to work, right? But we know that oftentimes if you look at marathons, there's many marathon runners that actually have more issues being overhydrated with hyponatremia because they're drinking too much water, right? So we want to make sure that we help our athletes understand that when you're sweating, you don't just need water, but you need sodium, you need chloride, potassium, you need electrolytes to help your body stay hydrated, right? So while of course sweat is mainly made up of water, also are losing electrolytes. So we always tell our athletes it's very important during a training session to replace what your body is using, which is carbohydrates, and losing, which is electrolytes, right? So we look, sodium is going to be lost in the greatest amount in sweat, right? We know that sodium is responsible for fluid distribution and retention, but also things like magnesium and calcium. These are essential, right? They're essential for muscle function, and they play a really important role in energy metabolism. So it's very important to help with our athlete education to get them to understand that when they're sweating, they're not just losing water. So we've got to make sure that we're replacing what we lose. So this is why during a training session of over 30 minutes, we always suggest a sports drink, right? A sports drink with some carbohydrates and electrolytes. Now, if you're training over 60 minutes, over 90 minutes, closer to 2 hours, you want to have a sports drink that has multiple transporter carbohydrates. So different sources of carbohydrates is going to be very, very important. But most important thing is to understand when you're sweating, you've got to replace what your body's losing. This is a very important thing for athletes to understand. We also know a lot of athletes, especially I know here in the US, I'm not sure if it's the same in Taiwan, but I imagine, female athletes a lot are hesitant with the carbohydrates. And so it's important for our athletes to understand that that carbohydrate is going to keep you fueled during your workout. And so that's why you really want that sports drink, because by putting a little bit of carbohydrate in, you're going to give your body the fuel that it needs to perform at its best. So again, understanding what is in your sweat, educating athletes that, you know, over 30 minutes you want to start thinking about those electrolytes and start thinking about more than just water. And of course, it's important to get athletes to understand what are some of the signs that they should look for. Because like we said before, with understanding the color of your urine, it's also important to educate athletes on signs of dehydration so that they can help themselves as well in case you're not nearby, right? So we know that a lot of things that can affect dehydration and cramping is going to come from electrolyte imbalances, carbohydrate depletion, so again, those reasons we need that sports drink. And then lactic acid buildup. We know there's a lot of research around the misfiring of neurons and looking at all those things when it comes to dehydration and cramping. But it's important to educate our athletes. You know, if you're headache, if you have a headache, if you have fatigue that is an unusual amount of fatigue. Of course, every athlete is going to fatigue, they're going to get tired, but educating them on the difference of what is normal fatigue and what is abnormal fatigue that could come from being dehydrated. If they're confused, if they're nauseous, These are not things that are normal. If they're dizzy, if they are pushing it and they just don't have the speed or the energy, a lot of that can come from being dehydrated. And so the regular testing, looking at the USG, looking at body weights in and out, these are good tools to keep athletes really aware of where their body is. And then they can also start to figure, okay, I was dehydrated today and I didn't feel as good. And when athletes can start to recognize, okay, I didn't feel as good and I was dehydrated, maybe there's a relationship between dehydration and performance. And the more we can get athletes to really understand that, the more they're going to understand the value of putting time and energy in to being hydrated. Because hydration can be a tricky thing in that you don't necessarily feel it right away, right? You don't feel that 1%, 2% dehydration that can significantly impact your performance. And so if you don't feel it, it's hard to think you need to do anything about it. And so regularly monitoring, regularly showing athletes their values, getting them to correlate how they're feeling and how they're performing can really get them to understand how important it is to stay hydrated. Okay. Now, came in, you got the athletes' weight when they came in, you made sure they were hydrated, you fueled them properly with the sports drink during a training session to hopefully maintain their hydration as much as possible. You still want to make sure that they're leaving a training session hydrated. Now, this can be a tricky one because, you know, for a professional athlete, this is not so much the case, but for the everyday athlete, a big point of education for people, because a lot of people that get into exercise, they do because they want to lose weight. And so sometimes they think, oh, I weighed myself before and I weighed myself afterwards. Great, I lost all of this weight. Without them really understanding that that was water weight that they lost. And that's going to come back. And that's not the type of weight loss that they want. Is that we want to make sure you're not losing that weight during that training session. You don't want to end up dehydrated after your training session. So it's very important to make sure that we understand how much weight our body is losing. And so what we do, again, for our athletes, if we're doing a weigh in, weigh out, which we do frequently, we assess if they lost more than 2% of their body weight. We want to make sure that they're not losing 2% of their body weight during a training session. So you can see on this chart how much they weighed, what 2% of that would be. Of course, this is all in pounds. So apologies for not converting it to kilograms, this is all in pounds. And then how many bottles of 16 ounces of water would we need to correct for that loss in body weight. So we add bottles of water, and then we also add, again, that CR7 Drive, which is the sports drink that we use with all of our sponsored teams and athletes. So this is a combination of a blend of 4 different types of carbohydrates, as well as sodium, potassium, magnesium, electrolytes that the body needs to rehydrate. So again, looking at that body weight, pre-workout, post-workout, educating our athletes that it's not about losing weight during a training session. That's not our goal. That's not our aim. We want to keep them hydrated. That's going to keep them performing at their best. And again, whether you're a pro athlete, whether you're an everyday athlete, that goes for everybody. So if you've got an athlete, they're starting to work out and they're telling you, like, I'm losing all this weight during a training session, this is a really important point of education to make sure that they understand this is not where weight loss is going to come from. We want to stay hydrated to help them perform. So just kind of an overview of what we would do, right? If this was match day -2, they would come in, they would give us a USG sample. We would assess that USG sample. Then within an hour of their workout, we would hydrate with the water and electrolytes that were needed based on their USG scores. Training, they're getting 8 ounces of fluid every 15 minutes. This is going to have, of course, sports drink in it, which is about going to be 200 calories, 52 grams of carbs, 540-ish milligrams of sodium. This is again going to help ensure that they get the fluids that they need, get the carbohydrates they need for fuel, the sodium that they need to maintain their levels of hydration through the training session. So you give them that hydration during, and then afterwards, again, we weigh out with the training clothes on. We want to make sure that they have lost less than 2% of their body weight. Now, if they have lost more than that 2% of their body weight, we go back, we look at this chart, and we rehydrate based on what their body's needs are from that body weight that was lost. Hopefully the goal is by the end of the season, our athletes are hydrating so well that we don't actually have to do that. But this is what we follow. So this is what our team dietitians have put together. This is a process that works very, very well for them. Something that the athletes used to, they understand the value of it, and they understand the connection to their workout. So we can do this on a regular basis. It just becomes part of the training protocol, and the athletes realize the value of it. So that's, hydration in a nutshell, and getting athletes to understand that not only do we need to hydrate during practice, we need to hydrate before we get to practice, we need to hydrate after we get to practice. And so oftentimes what we will do is we will make sure that we give our athletes a water bottle, and that they're responsible for showing up to practice, having filled and drank the entire water bottle. Same thing if we go on a flight or a bus trip, making sure that they're given a water bottle and that they fill it and they finish it for the training session, and getting them to understand that this is a commitment that they need to make throughout the entire day. We've found something that has become popular here are the water bottles that kind of list the hour of the day. So 8 a.m. drink your water bottle to here, 9 a.m. drink your water bottle to here, 10 a.m. Those are great reminders. That's been really effective for our athletes that struggle with hydration, as well as setting a timer on their phone and having a timer go off every hour to remind them to drink. Those have been really effective strategies for our athletes. Now, let's add one more twist to that. So we've got our athletes down, we've got the hydration down. What about in cold weather? This is somewhere that we really see athletes struggle with their nutrition is in the cold weather. I think when we get to hot weather, it's easier. It's hot. You're thirsty. You're visibly sweating more. You know that you need to drink more water. You know that you need to stay hydrated. You know you have to stay on top of your nutrition. But when we get into cold weather, this can become very, very challenging for a variety of reasons. So first and foremost, in cold weather, we see an increase in energy expenditure. So if your body's shivering, your body's expending more energy. Now couple that with the fact that in cold weather, oftentimes we see appetite suppression as well. So your energy expenditure is higher, your appetite is lower, you can see how we may end up in a situation where we're not consuming enough calories. This can be a big, big problem for athletes, right? We also see ventilatory and circulation changes as we get into colder weather. So we see an increase in breathing rate. We see lots of different changes in the body, and we also see changes in fuel source utilization, okay? In colder weathers, again, whether it's the shivering mechanism, our body is tending to need more carbohydrates. So if we go back to the original issue that we often see of people being more hesitant when it comes to consuming carbohydrates, now with the cold weather, we have an increase in energy expenditure, we have an increased utilization of carbohydrates, and we have a decrease in appetite. This can really lead to a whole host of problems, right? And add on to that, you actually need more fluids in the cold, right? You're losing a lot. When it's cold, you don't necessarily feel the sweat like you would feel in hot weather, but you actually need more fluids in the cold. And so this can be really a recipe for disaster. If athletes are not aware, and athletes go from regular normal temperatures into the cold, don't understand that you need to drink more, you need more carbohydrates. Your body is going to respond. The physiological changes that happen to your body in the cold can be very dramatic, especially if you're going out and you're doing longer training sessions. And so trying to think about how do you fuel yourself in those climates is going to be very important. And when we're talking to our cold weather athletes, the number one thing that they say is you've got to plan ahead. You cannot rely on normal thirst mechanisms. You can't rely on normal hunger cues. You have to plan ahead, fuel according to the plan that you set for yourself, right? Don't rely on waiting to be hungry. Don't rely on waiting to be thirsty. It's very important that you set a fueling plan, lay that out before you get into the cold, and make sure that you follow that plan. Again, instead of just listening to what your body is telling you. So some ways to do that, again, sports drinks, have those nearby. You can get the carbohydrates you need, you can get the electrolytes that you need. You can even consider making them a bit more concentrated as well. Say you're doing one of our athletes who's a cross-country skier, she makes sure that there's hydration stations set up for her on her route. Meal replacements. These can be a really good option, not in that they replace a meal, but they're higher in calories. So this can be a good option if you don't feel like eating a very large meal. Having a meal replacement supplement is a good way to get your body the protein that it needs, the carbohydrates that it needs. And of course, anything with heat. So after a workout, you can do, hot chocolate with some protein in it. You can do some warm soup to make sure that you're helping regulate your body temperature. We know that being dehydrated in general can affect our body's ability to regulate its temperature. And so now, if you're going into the cold where it can already be more challenging, it becomes even more important to stay hydrated. So again, the most important thing that all of our winter sports athletes will say is plan ahead. Come up with your fueling plan before you start out for your training session for the day and follow that plan to a T. So just think about that. Think about the fact that as you're exercising in the cold, your body's going to need more carbohydrates. It has a higher energy expenditure. You just might not feel as hungry. So very important. Figure out the caloric needs of your body. Plan ahead. Sports drinks, protein shakes, things like hot chocolate, these things are going to be very, very important. But, ultimately, it comes down to education and showing athletes how important hydration really is. And things like those USG testing and the daily weigh in and weigh out, that has been a really important tool for us with a lot of our athletes, because what we see is the beginning of a season, it can be all over the place. An athlete may be hydrated, may not be hydrated, they may not understand, but week in and week out, if we're doing USGs, if we're doing weigh in and weigh out, they start to see the pattern. And that sort of education, ultimately, that is going to be your best friend, because if an athlete can get it on their own, they're not relying on you to tell them exactly what they need to do, then you have won. And you have helped them understand the value of hydration and how to do it. So with that, I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your conference. I hope to be there in person someday. As always, it is an honor to be with you. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I hope to see you all very, very soon. Thank you so much.